I've been asking the question, how can art repatriate our country? How can art actually restore country?
Welcome to the Black Magic Woman podcast with Mundanara Bales.
I'd like to begin this podcast by acknowledging and paying my respects to the Kabi Kabi and Gubbi Gubbi peoples here on the Sunshine Coast. I'd also like to acknowledge their elders past and present, and acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. We have never ceded our sovereignty as First Nations peoples living in this country, now known as Australia. And as always, for every podcast, starting off with an acknowledgement of country and acknowledging traditional owners is a very important protocol, and it's a tradition that dates back tens of thousands of years in this country. So welcome to the Black Magic Woman podcast. If this is your first time that you've listened to an episode, welcome. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to yarn to First Nations peoples, but also non-Indigenous Australians as well, and to hear about their life, their stories, their challenges, whatever it is that makes them get up in the morning and do what they do. So it's really a conversation as if we are sitting around the kitchen table having a yarn. So my guest today is Megan Cope, and I would say that for at least 5 years, I'm going back about 5 years ago, starting the Black Card Cultural Tours in Brisbane, which is an opportunity to explore Brisbane with an Aboriginal tour guide by activating Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander public art installations. And that's where I first came across the name and the artist, Megan Cope. So it's an absolute pleasure to have this yarn with you today. I've never met you, and I'm looking forward to actually hearing more about you. So thank you so much, Megan, for joining me today on the podcast.
Oh, thanks so much, sis. It's really nice. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'd like to just acknowledge that I'm yarning to you from Bunjalung country. I live now down in Lismore. So, yeah, I moved here during the pandemic. But, yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this yarn.
Deadly. Well, look, sis, for everybody that's on this podcast, whether you're black, white or brindle, I always ask people to introduce themselves. So I'm going to basically hand the mic over to you. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, who your mob is?
Yeah. So I was born in Brisbane. My family's from North Stradbroke Island, Manjeraba. We're Quandamooka people. My mum's not Aboriginal. My dad is. And I was actually raised by him alone. In the 80s, it's quite, I guess, a unique upbringing in that way, being raised by a black father. Growing up, I've been Noogie and Noonuckle and had a really strong connection to my family on Stradbroke Island. So we are Islan and Martins, and closely related with the Delaney's, Bories, them mob. And, so that's my connection to home, and what all my work is about as well is kind of like making my experience and our experience visible to the rest of Australia, the way we see country, the way we share our relations to country, to each other. That's what informs my work and is my life as well. So I was born there in Brisbane and lived on Quandamooka country until I was about 4 or 5. And, back then my dad was a young, Aboriginal man, and the cops in Brisbane, as we know, were pretty horrific. And I think he just sort of got jack of punching on with cops, and we moved to Tasmania when I was 5. So I lived down there for my very young life and would just come up home to the island for summer holidays. So I'd come up for 2 months a year. And my grandma on my mum's side, she ran the Cleveland Sands, which is the local watering hole on the mainland. So I'd camp up with her at the pub, and then I'd go over and stay with Nan on the island. So that was like my life as a child, yeah.
Isn't that deadly that you had your grandmother there to also raise you? And
yeah,
I would say, you know, share stories with you. And I think for a lot of us, our grandmothers play such an important role in our culture, but also in families.
Oh, absolutely. And look, when I became like older and started to like ask Dad more sort of serious questions about like, well, you know, who are we and what does that mean? And like, tell me about, you know, your life. And he was like, oh, you've got to talk to your nan. Like, that's how it goes. Yeah. Because when he was a boy and, you know, like he would go and stay with his nan, so great granny and granddad. And so, you know, like he was like, that's how it goes. So, yeah, Nan shared all of her memories and, you know, we'd always go drop in, see family and hang out. It was pretty lovely. It was just like
that whole socialisation aspect as a black fella where you are socialised amongst your family and community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how we go. You know, and fishing and just hanging out, like just spending time together. That's what we love to do.
Yeah, getting to know
especially
your
during
mobbies.
holidays.
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, you know, a lot of families left the island, you know, like in my dad's generation because there wasn't much work. I mean, you could go work in the mines, but not everyone wanted to do that. And so, yeah, there's a big off-country community or Quandamooka diaspora, as people say. But every year, like so many people return to stay with elders and aunties and uncles who'd never left, you know.
And just for listeners, North Stradbroke Island is about, say, 20 minutes on the fast ferry from Brisbane?
Yeah, yep. And then 45 on the barge.
On the barge. It is absolute paradise. So a big shout out to my older sister Caillou. Caillou Bales lives over
lovely.
On North Straddy and Quandamooka country and married a local man there, Paddy Coolwell.
Yeah, so lovely. Love Pat.
I've got nephews and nieces now. Little Kai just turned 3. But I've got, Quandamooka little nephews and nieces that are growing up on country. They do not have running water. They don't have electricity. They do not have a toilet, like a proper flushing toilet.
No.
So she's like proper doing things like on country. I would say doing it tough, but she's absolutely loving the lifestyle that she lives and how they're able to bring up their children on country. Especially when you think about survival skills, life skills, hunting skills. Like my nephews and nieces, we'd be stuck if you think about me and my kids. We would not know where to go. If we were stranded in the middle of nowhere, I know my kids would not know what to do. Whereas my sister Caillou, her kids, right? They'll go straight into, you know, the mode that they're in not survival mode, but they
just know. They know the bush.
They know the bush. They know their country.
Yeah.
And there's no fear of that. It's not a threatening or a hostile environment where it would be threatening and hostile to my kids.
Don't. I know. It's funny that, like, my great nan and granddad were like that. They were real bushies. And so, because Dad spent so much time with them, they're like that. But Nan, no, everyone always called her uptown, you know.
I know it isn't terrible, the labours, though. But good on her if she was uptown. She wanted the finer things in life, right?
Well, she, you know.
And probably deserved it as well.
That's it. And she was a proud Aboriginal woman. Like, you know, she got a job in a shoe factory in West End lots of blackfellas were working in that factory then too. And then there was a whole mob of families in Winstanley Street up in Carina.
Yeah.
Carina Heights.
Right near Carindale Shopping Centre.
Yeah. And so, Nan wanted a better life. Like, she didn't want to live on the island. She just didn't. Like, and Dad would go over home all the time and look after Great Nan, do the lawns and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of interesting. I've kind of had a bit of a, like, when I'd come up and see Nan, it was real flash, and she had a house up at Point Lookout, because she married a white fella who was pretty flash. And but, it was interesting because even then we'd lay on the mattress in the living room because he wouldn't be there, and she'd show me, like, how to look at for mullet, from that elevation, and show me the shoals of fish, and taught me how to, like, we'd go, in the ute and go up bush and go and get ugrees and stuff like that. So she liked a nice house, but she loved her country and she loved her family as well. And so I had, like, best of both worlds.
I was just going to say that, Megan, isn't it good that we as blackfellas can have the best of both worlds if that's what we want?
Yeah, I think so. Well, when we lived in Tasmania, though, Dad was real bushy and we lived with no power, and, we'd go we had no TV, so I had, after school, my job was to go down and catch squid or salmon or cod off the jetty, and that country was really beautiful down there as well. And I was lucky there because he participated in the Aboriginal community down there. So we go over to Bruny Island and we're invited in. Like, the education system's different down there. If you're Aboriginal, you get to go on cultural camp and leave school for 2 weeks of every hunting season.
Wow.
And we were invited as kind of like honorary interstate blackfellows, and
they took
camp,
you in. You become part of the mob, which is deadly, right?
Like, I mean, this is in the 80s and 90s. Like, it was pretty, it's a little bit different, like, I guess. But we'd go mutton birding and hang out and get told all the stories from that country. It was really, really beautiful. But I don't know, like, I dream of living like my cousins too up in the bush over there, but I'm living in Lismore on Bundjalung country, so.
Well, the connection there says my great-grandfather was a famous boxer in Redfern by the name of Albie Roberts.
Oh, yeah.
So you would know, being on Bundjalung country, that the Roberts family, big family.
Yes, yeah.
Bundjalung. But my mum didn't know her dad, and my nan, sorry, that was her grandfather. My nan didn't know her dad. My nan was a ward of the state and my mum was a ward of the state, and we go back 5 generations of Aboriginal children, which are all my mothers and grandmothers, were all forcibly removed under government policy. So my nan, I went to live with her before she passed away about 10 years ago, maybe 13 years ago. And my nan told me that when she was about 18 or 19, she was walking down Redfern Street and one of the aunties said, "See that man in the suit and that top hat? That's your father."
Wow.
And my nan hid behind this kind of pole. She hid behind it when he kind of was getting closer to pass her by. And she was so scared to introduce herself, but that was the first time and the last time that she ever seen him. Now, all these years later, that we find out that, so my nan told us about 13 years ago. So my mum, growing up in Redfern back in the 60s and 70s, my mum didn't know that she was a Wanneroo woman from the Hunter Valley. She didn't know that she was a Bundjalung woman, and belonged to the Roberts family, because she was removed at an early age and institutionalised, and so was her mother. And we go, like I said, all my mothers and grandmothers on that side. So for me to be able to, I guess, embrace my Aboriginality. Like, I'm strong in my culture and very confident in my cultural identity. That wasn't the case when you go back, 2 generations ago. So I know that with a lot of the work that you do, and I want to start to kind of leading into the conversation about what you do and how you have managed to, I guess, travel the world by doing what you love doing. But you have, I guess, some of your art around issues relating to identity.
I guess I bring identity into it because I feel like it's so overlooked. I mean, a lot of the work, like once I finished uni and once the penny dropped and I realised, I've got to work with maps and I've got to work with military maps and this is how I'm going to say this is Aboriginal land, and you cannot keep taking that away or deny that from us, and identity, I think, that's what we were talking about. On the one hand, if you are disconnected from your country and your family, it's so difficult, for people to feel culturally strong because this system that we live in doesn't want us to be strong, and doesn't want us to have culture and doesn't want us to be ourselves. It wants us to be the same as its homogenic, colonial, flat, white.
What, to assimilate into white society, right?
Yeah.
And there was a policy around assimilating. The assimilation policy was all about that.
Yeah, and it's been interesting for me because we were saying before, Nan, being uptown and, I remember really clearly when Dad was saying, well, you got to talk to your Nan about all that. And I was like, okay. And then Nan's like, well, why do you want to know about that anyway? You could just be white. And I'm like, what? But wow. The older you get, it's the more isolated, I guess, the more sort of you come into yourself or start to go out into the world on your own, you realise everything that has been normal in an Aboriginal cultural setting is not normal in the outside world.
Yeah. In the world, in the Western world.
Yeah. In the Western world and in this, so-called Australia. So I guess I wanted to make work that started that conversation or really made a statement about that and to connect it how our families and our land or places inform us of who we are. And, that's really the case in my life too, Tasmania, really giving me a sense of self but knowing that's not my culture and not my cultural experience. However, if I didn't have those trips up every summer to Manduraba, what would my worldview be and how much would I rely my sense of cultural identity on the experience of the Palawa people, Anyway, so I just wanted to make work that I remember really clearly. I used to teach at QCA and
which is the Queensland College of Art.
College of Art, yeah. And Deadly Lisa Wadigo wrote this course, Indigenous Art Practices and Protocols. And so it was this compulsory class for mainstream art students to learn about Aboriginal art practices and protocols. And I was mid-20s and real full of fire. And I would say, walk into the class, at the start of the term, hands up who believes Brisbane is Aboriginal place, Aboriginal land. No one's hands would go up. And then I asked the question, well, do you go surfing at Currumbin on the Gold Coast? Yeah, a few hands would go up. And I'd be like, who believes Currumbin is an Aboriginal place? And you could see the people just going, what? And they were completely disassociated with the fact that this is Aboriginal land. So I thought about making maps and looking at place names and just like really kind of connecting that in a mainstream setting, and in a way that kind of wasn't drawing from any kind of unfinished business or work that aunties and uncles were still doing, you know, in community, because there's a lot of like, you know, repatriation of stuff that we're doing for ourselves, but then there's also this mainstream fight that we have. And yeah, so I was really keen to challenge people on, you know, it's like who here can speak Aboriginal lingo?
Yeah.
And no one put their hands up. But it's like, but if you say you're going to Currumbin or Talabudgera, like they're not English names. And people would just, you can see it, mind blown.
Yeah.
They had never thought about it.
Or
They had
Cooperoo,
never
or
connected
Wynnum,
that.
or Yurongpilly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What did they think? They thought it was English. It was so fascinating to me. So, yeah, I just thought I'm going to make a real point of stating the obvious, really, you know.
Well, I first come across one of your pieces at the State Library of Queensland at Coraldargan, which is the Indigenous Knowledge Centre here in Brisbane, in that cultural centre precinct, with the cultural tours. So I did a good stint as a tour guide, right, setting up this business, working in the business, getting my head around what a tour guide does to then train up other tour guides. So
yeah,
your map is on the glass wall. Can
yeah,
you say glass wall?
Glass, yeah.
On the glass, looking straight at the city, Meanjin, and the Martawa River is right there. And there's this beautiful map of Brisbane with all of the Aboriginal place names, basically. So Kurulpa is there. And when we bring people through on those walking tours, whether it's corporates or international students or even tourists, when there were tourists, we would go to that map as the first kind of installation was walking into the State Library and going, this is where we are.
Mm.
So we're locating ourselves on country using your map. And I thought it was such a clever map with the Martawa River running through that you could start seeing, there's Wynnum, oh, there's Cooperoo, there's Indooroopilly, and there's Yeronga. 40% of the suburbs of Brisbane are derivatives of Aboriginal language.
Yeah.
So you would know that because of that piece of work. And I only know that because of your piece of work at the State Library. So thank you for the education that you've provided us as blackfellas. And I've grown up in a very strong Aboriginal family, politically active Aboriginal family, but didn't know about Brisbane because Brisbane is not my country. I've been here for, been living in Brisbane since 1990 until last year. So I spent most of my life growing up now, I would say, in Brisbane. And I too was unaware of the fact that I knew local Aboriginal language with the place names that we refer to or use or say sometimes on a daily basis.
I think, it's like we've got this moment in time that hasn't occurred before where we have the opportunity to articulate these things in ways that previous generations haven't been afforded, and I think that it's a real opportunity for us to build on. And, with that map, I said to, because Amanda Heyman was working there back then, and I was like, you could also turn it into a project for elders if they wanted to continue to research and develop this map, like to overlay more names or other ways of relating to country. You could make stickers, and make it like so it's alive and continuing, because so much of this reclamation work is unfinished business. But that's, for me, it's just, I feel like we can't wait any longer. and that we can just focus on the existing names and feel the power that it gives us when we make that connection.
Definitely. Yeah, I agree with you 100% because I feel people inspired on the walking tours when we're, activating public arts such as yours. People are blown away. They're amazed. Their eyes are open. They've just learnt something that they didn't know. And people feel so much more connected, especially for Brisbaneites.
Yeah.
That are born and raised in Brisbane. Their families were born and raised in Brisbane. They go back 5 generations to Brisbane, right? A lot of people in Queensland don't leave Queensland. I feel that people with just that one installation are like, oh, my God, this is fascinating. Why aren't we learning about this? Why don't I know this already? And over at the Museum of Brisbane, which is in the City Hall, up on level 3 for people, listeners that don't know about the Museum of Brisbane. It's in King George Square in Brisbane, and you can learn about the history of Brisbane. And Megan, you've got another map there with the Mardawa River and place names again that we take people there. So you've come up twice now on our walking tours.
That's nice.
So tell us a little bit about, I guess, how did you find yourself engaging with these big institutions? Because I know that you've been, you've done so many amazing things, and we're going to get to those amazing things. But how did you find yourself working with, say, the State Library or the Museum of Brisbane?
Well, I went to art school. Actually, how I started out, like I was pretty wild as a young teenager, pretty reckless, pretty angry, and wild. And I left home at 14 and just was like, right, I'm out of here. I'm going to do my own thing. And I then, I actually went to the Gold Coast and I got a job in a boomerang factory. A mate came over and then he was going to go put his form in and I was like, I'll get a ride. And then I was just tapping the screen, at Centrelink, and I saw this job come up for Aboriginal artists and I was like, oh, that's me.
So at 14 you already knew what you wanted to do?
Well, no, by then
not
I was
new,
16.
But it was already, So in those early years of your life, teenage years.
Yeah.
You already knew that you wanted to be an artist.
Well, I was really lucky. In Tasmania, I guess the first thing was like I was saying, I was a pretty troubled teen, and I left home and I actually didn't go to school. And then my principal he tracked me down. I got a little bed sit from a women's shelter and got my own place, and I was just living there. I thought, I know everything, teenager, I knew everything about the world. Yeah. I don't need to go to school. I've learnt everything. But my principal he found me and he said, if you don't come to school, I'm going to call Social Security and tell them and you'll get your money cut off. And so I was like, oh, okay. Quickly went down to school and he was amazing and said, look, I know you've had it hard, but you're going to really regret it if you don't finish year 10. And can you just please come to school for art and finish the year? And then also the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre were making this book of Dreamtime stories, and an elder, Rosemary, I can't remember her last name, but she had written the stories and we had to interpret them. And I was all big mouth, I'm not allowed to do these stories. I'm not from here. You don't understand. And then, of course, last minute, I stayed up until after midnight and painted this story and submitted it, and it got published.
Wow.
And it's an amazing book called Taraba. And so, that happened in my final year of high school, and the principal was so kind and he set it up so I went to school Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays and just did art all day.
Yeah.
and I finished grade 10. So, yeah, like that happened, but then I was like wild again for another like year. Moved to Queensland, moved back to Queensland, moved to the Gold Coast. I stayed with Dad for a bit, but things were a bit wild there too. So, I found myself on the Gold Coast, actually living with the Walker mob.
Yes.
And they were dancing at Currumbin Sanctuary back then.
I remember it.
Yeah.
Because we were in a dance troupe as well, and we actually, my 7 sisters and I, we actually auditioned for the same slot. We auditioned for that, and they got it. So I remember this. Yeah. So my sister used to date Nunca, which is Raymond Walker. So he used to live at our house at Enley Road, and Luana and Jarlo, his little ones, who are not little ones anymore.
No, they've grown up now,
Well, he was raising them.
Yeah.
Remember I said how my sister and her partner lived at our house? Well, that was him.
Yeah, right.
So there you go.
Yeah.
So small world.
I know. Yeah. Well, I ended up living there because it turned out one of my good friends, they never identified, but then like the older sister did, and so younger sister and I were best mates. We got into all kinds of trouble as young ones. But then, so I ran into her at the big day out, and then she was like, "Oh, I'm like married up to one of your mob," and I was like, "True." And then so she was married up to Joel, like Bomber.
Yep.
Yeah, and so anyway, I camped up with them for a while, and then I went into Centrelink one day, Aboriginal artist, and I was like, oh, that's me. So by then I was 16, and then I started working in this boomerang factory. On the one hand, I was like, I just want to get my life together, and so I worked there, but it was really hard. It was like $3.60 an hour, and I didn't know my rights. I kind of just had a break. I removed myself from everyone. I just really withdrew, got my own place, and just wanted to, like, I don't know, start again.
Yeah.
Or something.
Yeah.
So I did that, and I was there for 10 months, and then I decided, and I was, like, really observant. And then there was these, like, white people who would come in with their boomerangs, and they were like fancy boomerangs, and they were like invoicing and getting paid good money. And I was like, oh, well, I want to do that. And they're like not even Aboriginal. There was only 2 black fellas working there, me and this other fella. And so I decided, that's it, I'm staying home, and I'm not I want to work from home.
I ain't nobody's slave.
Yeah. And so they were like, okay, and they let me do it. And then I actually would keep the seconds.
Yeah.
And, like, keep the offcuts of canvas.
Yeah.
So I was making this, like, ooga booga, like, art for the tourist market.
Little side hustle going on.
Yeah. And then I started, like, selling those offcuts, like, independently, directly to the tourist shops.
Wow.
And then
so entrepreneurial skills also back in the day.
Well, come
which
on,
you don't even,
how we go. Like,
I know.
Well, when you're surviving, like your grannies, like
so resourceful.
I've heard amazing stories in Redfern too. Like, it was tough. Like,
yeah.
And you got to be resourceful. And I mean, that was my option. Like, keep working in this racist place where they're like, we don't want to hear about you saving the dolphins. I'm like, I don't even talk about that. Like, what are you talking about? It was really bad. Anyway, so I started this side hustle, and then I went in there and I was like, right, I'm quitting. And I just actually found the separation certificate the other day, and it said, like, Megan walked in on this date and stated she was leaving to, quote, do her own thing.
Oh, my goodness. Well, there you go, memories. And look where you are now, my sister.
Yeah. Well, what happened was, like, I got really ripped off by one of them tourist shops, and like most of the time I just did run of the mill gammon story.
Yeah.
Not even a story, just a kangaroo here and a blah blah blah. And you know that it's like fake, but it's not fake.
It's not
because
fake.
if it's made by an Aboriginal person, it's not fake. But you know what I mean.
But you were just doing a half kind of
just making a living.
Yeah.
Bread and butter. I call it bread and butter.
Yeah.
But this one time I did a painting of Kabul, carpet snake.
Yeah.
And our 3 clan groups, Nunakul, Nuki and Gornpool, and it was like the first kind of painting I did that was spiritual and cultural and connected to home.
And special.
And I felt really, I don't know, I felt like when they said that they'd sold it, I wanted to know who bought it, and I'd never felt that before. And then when they told me who bought it, it was like an American guy, and then I was like, oh, how much did you get for it? And they sold it for like $650, and I had sold it to them for $40, and I wanted $100, but
which was a lot of money back then, right?
Oh yeah, but I accepted 40, and then to know what had happened, I was like, whoa! It just slapped me down so hard, and. Yeah, so then I rang Nan and I was telling her about it, and she was just like, you know, she's like, if you like art, why don't you go and study it? Like, why don't you go to university? And I was like, yeah.
Nan's always right.
And it was that simple, you know, like, and then I enrolled in the course in Brisbane and met Vernon and Richard Bell and Gordon Hookie and Uncle Laurie Nelson and Jennifer Hurd and all the peers that I'm like, you know, connected to this day, like, you know.
Which is the proper now. That's the proper now.
Yeah.
Aboriginal Art Collective, yeah.
Collective, yeah. You know, I was 18 by then when I met them, and
they're big names.
Oh, they're incredible.
Not just in our community, but worldwide, right? They, you know, all of them, everyone. I'm not going to single anyone out, but they're all big names that you were able to connect with at such a young age, and obviously be part of what they have now.
Well, they set up that course,
for
contemporary Australian Aboriginal or Indigenous art, and they wanted to grow like the generation of contemporary artists that were directly combating, you know, that kind of pathway that so many of us have, where we're like, we want to do art, so we go and paint boomerangs for tourists, you know, like many of our mob, like that seems like the only way to art and the only way to practice culture and only way to represent ourselves. And, you know, they'd set up that course so that we could learn about Western art, we could learn about the power of art in a global kind of context, and then also learn, like, kind of just go, well, actually, you know, dot art originates from the desert, the Central Desert, and it was like a white fella, Rex Batterby, who went out there when the mission was closing down, and he encouraged the people out there in Papunya to he was observing their ceremonial customs where they were doing installations in the desert, you know. They would make ceremonial grounds and decorate with feathers and dots and you know, their bodies as well. And he was like, take what you're doing off your body and off the land and onto a canvas.
Yeah, well,
and
Rex Batterby actually taught Albert Namatjira.
Yes.
He actually was a famous watercolour artist who used to go out to outback Australia and to beautiful places like Hermannsburg and paint like the McDowell Ranges. Yeah. And that's how Albert Namatjira learnt how to – well, he didn't learn how to paint, but he was copying.
He showed him.
Yeah, he showed him. And as part of our cultural tours, we educate people about the fact that dot painting started in the 1970s.
Yeah.
Through a white fella who was a school teacher, actually. He actually taught the people there at Papunya about dot painting.
exactly.
So dot painting is not exactly a traditional Aboriginal art form. A lot of people would not know that. So I'm glad you mentioned it.
Well, that was transformative because, when you grow up rough and low income and just, I thought I was killing it, and I kind of was. I was making pretty good money, but it was a very prescribed pathway, It was completely constructed by the Aboriginal art market and, that's created by white people. And so,
who largely benefit in terms of the profits,
absolutely. So, it was radical to go to art school run by radical blackfellas who were like, no, we do not need to do that. We need to tell our stories about the urban experience, about the experience of colonisation, about politics. We need to amplify our plight, our politics, and all of that. And I was like, whoa. It was amazing.
Well, Uncle Richard Bell, married to Annie Liz Duncan. Annie Liz and my mum were like sisters.
Oh, yeah.
So
lovely.
I grew up with Uncle Richard and Annie Liz in our house at 157 Ennerley Road, the same house across the road from Boggaroe Jail.
Yeah.
Uncle Laurie Nielsen was very close to my dad as well. He'd done the emu sculptures at the radio station at 98.9 FM in West End. He also done another artwork for my dad that I have, which is amazing. And Annie, I used to call her Miss Jennifer.
Jennifer Hurd
was my school teacher at the Murray School. So in terms of the people you're mentioning and your story, I've got all these connections with you, sis, and can't wait to actually meet you properly in person. I just want to ask you a question about all the places you've been in the world. What has been the one that stood out, your favourite country? Because I know when I looked at your bio and I'm like, what do we talk about? Do we talk about your residency in 2018 in Paris? Do we talk about Quebec in Canada? Where do we start? Like, what's been your highlight in your career? That's a good question.
Oh, gee. It's so funny. Like, it is really incredible to go overseas. But, that time in Paris, like, we're learning all this stuff and getting special access to the Louvre, like the most important art institution in France. And, I was walking down the street with the curator and I was like, you know what? I don't know if I can take another Napoleonic day. Like, I just want to talk about the Black Napoleon. And she was like, the what? And I was like, the Black Napoleon. And she goes, who's that? And I was like, well, we had a warrior who fought the colonists. And the British called him the Black Napoleon from Stradbroke Island. And she was like, is there evidence of this? I was like, yes. Even though I didn't know if there was, because I'd only been yarned the story.
Yeah.
But, it's sort of weird. I don't know if, I know that other blackfellas feel this way too. Like, you could be everywhere, but, but your heart's at home. It's where your family are. It's where your country is. It's so, often when I'm overseas, it's really incredible, but it's quite challenging,
trying to navigate another world again.
Gosh, where we sit, it's quite interesting because Australia broadcasts itself as this, the home of the oldest living race on earth, and it's so cultural and sophisticated. But then,
when it's
you
not,
live here, when you are that, connected to the old, it's not what Australia advertises itself to be. And so it's quite an interesting dynamic overseas, with what people have learnt about us and, how the relationship with colonialism and the discussion, Europe doesn't even want to talk about. They think they don't have a history, or they, it's interesting. But it's also amazing, I just think gosh, like
You've
how
been-
lucky am I?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I know you've been to what? Jerusalem, Washington, Hong
Yeah.
Kong, Canada, New Zealand, obviously Paris. What other countries have you been to?
Well, geez. Well, I went on a holiday once by myself, and I drove a car from France to the south of Portugal, and I reckon that was probably the best time. I just got in this car, go to the market, buy sardines in the morning in the fish market, and then drive like for as long as I could go, and then just pull up, camp, like light a fire and eat the sardines on the fire. That was kind of the best time, like going along the west coast of Spain and Portugal.
I can't wait. That's my kids want to go to Spain. Literally, my son Lamecki said, "Why can't we go to Spain, Mum?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Why Spain?"
And Greece as well. The Greeks are like blackfellas. They don't care about money. They just want to hang out, eat good food, yarn up. Like they love talking.
That
they just
family orientated culture.
Totally. Not so much. They don't care so much about money. You just get what you need, and then life is about family. And so I recommend going to Greece and Spain definitely, because they're culturally similar in that way. I felt connected, and actually there's like so many eucalyptus trees.
Wow.
Whenever I felt homesick, I just grabbed them gum leaves and crush them up and have a little cry. Yeah.
Sis, there was an opening at the University of Queensland, right, this year that I went to, called O Current Affair. Yeah. And that was mind-blowing. I'll be honest with you. I don't get to many events, and I don't go, I just don't go out, and I don't socialise a lot. When you've got kids.
Family.
Yeah, your kids and married and run a business. So my downtime is my time. But I really enjoyed going to, that A Current Affair, the big night, the opening night. And big shout out to Amanda Heyman and also Troy Casey from Black Lash that are doing amazing things. And now I've got the Aboriginal Art Co. And I've also had them on this podcast. If you want to listen to their yarn, it's way back in the earlier episodes. But before we wrap up, I just want to ask you, how was that? What was that experience like, that A Current Affair? It was quite political, and it was a big deal, like all the people there at the University of Queensland, which is, known as, the University of it's the Sandstone University.
Yeah, but it's also like the home of like so much early political activism as well. Like, the radio station ran out of there, or heaps of like protests was organised out of there. Yeah. Like Uncle Sammy Watson, he had like big history there as well. So
Uncle Ross actually started Murray Radio, Murray Hour at the University of Queensland.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the early days, like it was, students were, like able to mobilise from there. They had access to all services like students studying law and, all of that kind of stuff. And so in that sense, I felt like it was a great place to have the show. And we just, as a collective, Proper Now, we hadn't had a show for 5 years, and people were like, is Proper Now over? And I was like, no, like it's just hard for us to have a show. Like we're so busy as individuals, and like it's just difficult. So we actually all agreed, like, we can't really leave it any longer. And we asked Amanda and Troy to come on board and give us a hand, like, getting it together and doing those hard yards for us, and we'll do the art, So it was really, really great to get back together again and show as a group, because that's actually why Proper Now started in the first place, back 17 years ago when the collective started, completely different cultural landscape. And it was very hard for Aboriginal people to get a show. Contemporary artists that were telling the truth about deaths in custody, you know, telling the truth about injustice, telling the truth about the fact that Aboriginal art is a white construct, you know, like nobody wanted a bar of the founding members. So they got together and started just having their own shows and had their own studio back where 9890 is now, in the old Amersham building.
Yes, there's history there again.
Yeah. So it was so wonderful to be together again. And, you know, when we started up getting it ready, you know, Uncle Laurie was still with us and he was really excited, and he was very unwell at that time, but he, you know, the prospect of having a show was something that was keeping him going, you know, and kept us all very in touch with him as well. So it was very sad that he couldn't make it. You know, he had passed by the time we got, because it was delayed with COVID too, you know, like, but it was so powerful for us to be together.
I know. And
again,
I was looking for you.
Yeah.
I was looking for you that night. I'm like, another hit list when you go to places, especially like openings, you need to go and see people and say congratulations or well done, or, you know, just, you know, let people know that you're very appreciative of their contribution, especially to our society, because that's what I think art does.
Yeah.
It starts conversations, especially on our walking tours.
Yeah.
It's like cultural awareness training, but outdoors in a non-threatening environment with your colleagues. And we're using art as a form to open up that dialogue, to have a conversation where people can ask questions in a way that they probably wouldn't outside of the tour.
Exactly.
So I absolutely love the fact that art does start conversations, and how important it is to have people like yourselves, especially Proper Now, do the work that you do and make the statements that you make, and now not being rewarded, but you're being acknowledged and you're getting more work. So there's an appetite for that now. Things are slowly changing in this country, that the truth is slowly coming to the surface. It's always been there, but there's a whole lot of denial in Australia about Australia's history, not Aboriginal history, it's Australian history.
No, that's right.
Our shared history. So that denial is starting to shift very slowly, 250 years. We've probably got another 250 years to go. So there's some true acceptance of what happened in this country, and then the impacts of colonialism and the impacts of past government policies, and trying to understand intergenerational trauma. So there's a whole lot I want to yarn to you about, but I know we're running out of time. But what I want to say to you really, really quickly is that is there any works that are in the pipeline? Is there anything that you can share with us? And by the way, congratulations with the grant that you received from the Copyright Agency. Yeah. They put a media release out there and your name was, and I'm like, bang. Actually, they emailed me and I was like, oh my goodness, this is an opportunity to actually reach out to Megan. So a big shout out to the Copyright Agency with that cultural fund to support artists like yourself. But yeah, is there anything on the horizon that you can share with us before we wrap up?
Well, I mean, I'm just also so grateful for their support for this project, because it is really ambitious. And, what I want to do is, I guess, I've been talking about the impact of colonisation and the extraction and the politics and economics and all of that kind of stuff. And now, like, I guess with the midden works that I've been doing, it's kind of come to a point where it's like, you know what, I've been asking the question, how can art like rematriate our country? How can art actually restore country? Like, we heal our minds and our bodies and our communities through art, but what are we doing for country? And we know that there's so much red tape and restrictions and gates when it comes to, the work that we want to do for our country. So, yeah, I really wanted to kind of see if I could push the boundaries and replant an oyster reef on an uncle's bank and oyster bank and, yeah, make a living sculpture. So that's what we're doing.
Wow.
So at the moment we've got all these flash restaurants in Byron Bay, like on Bundjalung country, keeping all their shell waste, all their oyster shell waste.
Yeah.
And then we're collecting that and we're processing it, cleaning it, and then we're stringing up all these poles, and we're going to plant those poles on the bank in an artistic kind of form. And, you know, it's it'll become a future oyster reef.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've had to compromise a bit because, you know, the laws are so restrictive for us, you know, especially with sea country, and, you know, native title doesn't always give us the autonomy that we desire. So just trying to balance this, like, how do I do something through art to subvert those restrictions and set up something for the future and kind of challenge what art can be as well. So, yeah, we're doing this big planting next year.
So for listeners, watch this space. So how can people get in contact with you, Megan? Like, are you on social media? Do you have a website? How can people
I do. Yes, I do have a website. You can Google me. I think it's megancope.com.au.
Yeah.
And then there's an email on there, and there's also my internet kind of name is Nutmeg and Honey. I don't know why. It just is.
I love it.
And that's on Instagram. And, yeah, like if people want to get involved, we're in the process of harvesting timber and oyster shells at the moment, and then we're stringing them all up. It's a bit funny. My uncle was like, what are you going to do that for? Like, that's so hard. That's really hard work. And I'm like, well, that's the art.
It's not all meant to be easy.
Yeah. And we, you know, I think a lot of people want to get involved, and I think that's how we can make it great. We're so compromised, you know, often we don't have the resources to fully achieve the things we want to, but when we work as collectives, we can. So this project is extremely collective and community active. So, yeah, and it's in the making. And, you know, I don't know, I just feel like maybe in years to come we could just do an annual planting and just actually, hopefully, I don't know, establish some kind of reef formation that our ancestors all had already there when the colonisers came and took it. So,
sis, what a lovely way to wrap up our deadly yarn. I'm looking forward to seeing this oyster reef, so I'll definitely be following you, and I'll
keep in touch.
I will definitely. So, look, I just want to say thank you. And the last hour we've gone over because it's so interesting and fascinating and inspiring to hear your story and just to listen to you. I could sit here for another hour. But you know what? We should do part 2. And in the new year, I'll get back in touch with you and we'll have a yarn about the other things that you've been doing and amazing things that you've achieved in your life. But on that note, I just want to say thank you for sharing your life with us and your art with us, and your contribution to society, because I honestly believe, and I've seen it firsthand with the Black Card Cultural Tours, through those kind of activating public art, how we can start to really change the narrative in this country. So, Megan, my sister, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I look forward to meeting you in the flesh one day.
Likewise, Mandanara. Thank you so much for your time and this deadly podcast too. Thank you.
Oh, look, another black magic woman that I've got on the show. Thank you, my sister, and enjoy Christmas and the holiday season.
Yeah, you too. Keep in touch.
I definitely will. I got your number now.
Great. Okay.
Thank you.
Care.
You too. Bye.
Okay. See ya.
What an absolute legend. I have always wanted to meet the sister. Haven't actually met her in person, which is hard to believe, I know. I know most people in Brisbane, especially black fellas, but just haven't haven't crossed Megan's path yet, even though we deliver or run the cultural tours, which features Megan's artworks, both, like I said, at the State Library of Queensland on the ground floor, and also over at the Museum of Brisbane on level 3 in the City Hall in King George Square. Highly recommend doing one of our tours. But I just want to share with you a little bit about Megan. Her site-specific sculptural installations, video work and paintings investigate issues relating to identity, the environment and mapping practices. Cope's work often resists prescribed notions of Aboriginality and examines psychogeographies that challenge the grand narrative of Australia and our sense of time and ownership in a settler colonial state. These explorations result in various material outcomes. In 2020, Cope presented newly commissioned work at the 2020 Adelaide Biennial of Australian Art, Monster Theatres. She has also featured work in the NGV Triennial 2020, the 2021 Tarrawarra Museum of Art Biennial, Slow Moving Waters, and in the 2021 exhibition O Current Affair, proper now at the University of Queensland Art Museum, which we spoke about. Recent solo exhibitions include Fractures and Frequencies, presented at the UNSW Galleries as part of Sydney Festival 2020 and 2021, and Unbroken Connections at Canberra Glassworks following an artist residency. In 2018, Megan undertook a residency in Paris with the Australian Print Workshop for a project titled French Connections, which resulted in an exhibition at the Australian Print Workshop in 2019 and a tour to Mossman Art Gallery in 2020. In 2018, she also completed several public art projects, including Willem Nullet, Our Place, commissioned for the Monash University Museum of Art's public art walk at Monash University. Her large-scale sculptural installations were curated into 3 national survey exhibitions. The National, 2017, at the Art Gallery of New South Wales, Defying Empire. 3rd National Indigenous Art Triennial, 2017, at the National Gallery of Australia, and Sovereignty, 2016, at the Australian Centre for Contemporary Art in Melbourne. In 2017 to 2019, Cope was the official war artist commissioned by the Australian War Memorial and travelled to the Middle East, resulting in the series Fight or Flight, held by the Australian War Memorial. In 2016, Megan was also commissioned to create new work for Frontier Imaginaries at QUT Art Museum, which toured to Al Mamal Foundation for Contemporary Art in Jerusalem. She also exhibited alongside Tracy Moffat at Art Space in Bereft, a solo exhibition of sculptural and video work in 2016. This woman is absolutely extraordinary, and there's so much more in her bio. But let me just wrap up with this. Megan Cope's work has been exhibited in Australia and internationally, including at the Queensland Art Gallery, Gallery of Modern Art, Art Gallery of New South Wales, Gold Coast City Art Gallery, Mona Foma, Hobart, ARC Biennial, Brisbane, Cairns, Regional Art Gallery, the Koori Heritage Trust in Melbourne, City Gallery in Wellington, New Zealand, Parasite Contemporary Art Space, Hong Kong, Careof Art Space in Milan, the Australian Embassy in Washington, and the Next Wave Festival in 2014. In 2015, Megan's work was curated into an exhibition at the Musée de la Civilisation in Quebec, Canada, which also acquired her work for their permanent collection. As we spoke about, Megan Cope is a member of the Aboriginal Art Collective, proper now, mixing it with some of the deadliest black fellas in this country. Big shout out to Gordon Hookie and Uncle Richard Bell, Tony Alberts, Jennifer Hurd. Much love and respect to each and every one of you. We do need to get Megan back on this podcast in the new year, so watch this space. I hope you've enjoyed this yarn, and until next time, bye for now.
Don't forget to follow Black Magic Woman podcast on all social media platforms. To keep up to date with the latest episodes and news, head to blackmagicwoman.com.au. You can rate and review the podcast on iTunes, and please feel free to share the podcast with your family and friends.